Did we hear from Derwin? Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The Public Works Committee will come to order. We have a general agenda and a consent agenda. We'll take, as usual, the consent agenda items first. There are only two things on here. Do we need to pull either one of these for discussion? All right. If not, is there a motion for approval of C1 and C2?
Second.
All right. Any discussion? Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Those are approved. Then we'll go to the general agenda. Item G1, please.
Item G1, update on greenway and sidewalk projects.
And Ms. Tanique McCullough. Ms. McCullough.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Just briefly, at the Public Works Committee meeting on March 18th, Councilmember Bessie, you had asked for us to give you an update on the estimates for Southwind, Ashley Brook, Melinda, Patricia Lane, Southview. What you have in your package is just an update of where we are, it's information on those projects that provides the cost estimate and the project limits for each of those.
Thank you very much. That's very useful information. I went over the Griffith Road, and Councilmember Light and I have both been getting some continuing requests for that project in particular. We've been thinking in terms of $1.2 million for the whole road, but I see if we just went down to Everidge Road, which is most of the sections, but and gets almost, gets the overwhelming majority of the population along there, that would be only about $550,000. You split it up between two wards if we were to do that. And perhaps, given its size, put it in as an SDPDA application, then it goes from being over the top to feasibility. And Mr. Turner and I were also discussing earlier this afternoon the Southwind Drive question and some alternatives on that as well. So this is very useful. I imagine my colleagues will have similar questions about projects in their wards. Thank you very much. Are there any particular projects that you'd like more data on? Yes, Mr. Clark.
Just a generic question. How far out do we have projects planned, and when will we be looking at the list?
I'll take it if you don't mind. We do plan to bring the committee, and all the council members will get, obviously, information on their wards, a list of all the projects in the sidewalks and road resurfacings that we plan to recommend to you for the bond package, and we'll be bringing that next month.
Okay.
And we will look for feedback and input from council members on any adjustments that need to be made to that list based upon your expertise and knowledge about your ward.
Thank you. That's all.
All right. Any other queries for Ms. McCullough on Greenway and sidewalk project? Come to think of it, I did. Now I wasn't thinking Greenway. What's the status on Brushy 3, please?
Pardon me?
Brushy 3, Brushy Fork 3.
Brushy Fork 3. I can bring that to you next month. Next month we do have a list of projects, an update for all of our Greenway projects that we will bring to the Public Works Committee.
Okay. The last I heard of that one, it was being routed through for signatures here internally prior to putting it out for the contract.
We'll check for you.
Okay, yeah, that's one of those where it's taking years, and the money is sitting in the state DOT. Every time money's sitting in the state DOT, I'm afraid it's going to be yanked. And now that it's actually in-house, we want to get it out there as quickly as possible. Mr. Taylor.
Thank you, Councilmember Bessie. I just wanted to make a quick point. I shook my head and said I'd had no further inquiries, but I just wanted to say that the management staff is aware that there's a few sidewalks in the Southeast Ward that require a little bit of attention, and we're expecting a report on. I'd rather not go into detail about that, but I'm sure I'll be updated as we move forward.
All right, great. Anything else? Thank you very much. That's item G1. It's information item, no vote needed. Report G2.
Item G2, report on sidewalk project selection criteria.
Ms. McCullough.
Thank you, sir. The committee had asked that we bring forward some information on the sidewalk project selection criteria. What you have in your package is information that shows the existing criteria that we use on rating sidewalks. As you could see on the existing criteria, we look at the street type, higher rating for major thoroughfares, roadways that have more traffic on them. We also look at the proximity to schools with a higher rating for schools that are close to where the sidewalk requests are made. We look at the pedestrian generators that are within a half of a mile, and there's a maximum of 20 points that you can receive in that area. The connection, or if does it connect to an existing sidewalk, greenway, or bike trails. And looking at those priorities, there's a maximum of 12 points you can receive in that area. If you want to think about what does it mean for major connectivity, if you think about a roadway like Reynolds Park Road, which has some existing sidewalk, it has some greenway, and it also has bike trails, that would be a roadway that may receive 12 points, whereas a roadway that's on a dead-end street or a cul-de-sac may only receive 2 points when you're thinking about major connectivity. And then bus stops, the proximity to bus stops, and there's a maximum of 15 points in that area. When you add up the points, there's a total of 82 points maximum that you could receive. And there were other criteria that we used to review and assess. What we've done, if you look at the attachment B, we've tried to include all of those items to consider, but we've added some additional items, reconfigured the points so that you would be looking at a point structure of a maximum of 100 points, which gives it makes it a little bit more easy to compare versus 40 points of 82 versus 40 of 100. Some of the other things that we've added for council to consider would be giving points for the posted speed limit, giving points for other factors such as bike lanes and curb and gutter, and then also giving points for community support. So if you have a community that between 75 to 100%, there's a maximum score of 8 that you can receive. But if you have a community that between 1% and 25% wanting the sidewalk, which means that most of the neighborhood doesn't, then they would receive lower points, and that would be factored into the overall score. So these are just some things that we thought that we could bring before you to look at, compare it to the old way that we, or the current way that we're using to evaluate sidewalks. And at your request, then we could bring something before you to formally consider and adopt.
I had one question, and then I'll open the floor. Pedestrian generators, residential area, park, et cetera. Max score 20 for the category. Can you count residential area or park more than once if there's more than once along there within the 20-point maximum?
No, sir. The way that this is set up, if it's a residential area, you would receive 4 points, and then if there are multiple parks in that area, then you would receive another 4 points. Did I answer that correctly?
Yes.
Okay.
Think about that. Other questions or comments? Mr. Clark.
I have experienced this, and I think other council members have as well, in that something comes up to be built, and then we get complaints from the neighborhood. We canvass them, and I think you had probably the most recent one, and it turns out 80% of the people didn't want it. I'm not suggesting we canvass beforehand, or maybe I am, I'm not sure, but this community support, I certainly think that's critical, but I'm concerned if we do it beforehand, everybody thinks they're getting it, and then I get calls for the next 2 years, where's my sidewalk? If we don't do it, then we haven't gauged whether or not it's worth messing with. Thoughts, comments?
From our perspective, canvassing the community beforehand, we can provide the information in the letter letting them know that we are reviewing it for a study for future needs, and we can try to share that, but there would be no way that the community would not know or could not assume that that automatically means that they will be getting a sidewalk.
One option might be to use passive indicators of community support. In other words, don't go out and actively ask folks if they support a specific sidewalk, but keep a record of people who call into the office and ask for sidewalk, and use that as our indicator of community support.
Because I will say that there probably are times I would like, and I have done it several times, to canvass the neighborhood, do you really want it? But anyway, okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Yeah, and I've juggled with how to address that. For my thinking, if you're talking about a critical transportation link, multiple neighborhoods, multiple service areas, then to me, the neighborhood opinion is a factor, but not the deciding one. If you're talking about something that is a sidewalk that is going to exclusively serve that street, then, you know, I'd let it be decisive.
Just to me, depends. We've got some places in the South Florida that, first of all, people say, even though they get the letter about, you know, possibility of sidewalk, no one remembers that. No one. And then, you know, there is just simply the dysfunction when you're talking about small little areas that don't go anywhere. Hey, we can walk in the street, you know, there's not that much traffic. So, yeah, that's, I just say that people are funny animals. So that's.
Other comments, questions? So you'll be coming back about when?
If you'd like to give us any direction about whether you want us to include these additional categories, and we'll come back in a couple of months with a indicator, or I'm sorry, with a recommendation that reflects those comments.
It makes sense to me. Other opinions?
Yeah, I definitely support the additional categories.
Okay.
I actually like the 100-point scale instead of the 82-point scale. I think it makes a little bit more sense. Overall, I think it's a good idea, and we should move forward on it.
Okay. Any objection? I think you can take that as consensus. Thank you. Okay. Item 3, please.
Item G3, report on bicycle facilities improvement selection criteria.
Ms. McGough.
Thank you again. This committee had asked that we come before you to talk about bicycle facilities and how we go about selecting, or the criteria used for bicycle and facilities, on-street facilities. Basically, what happens is in our comprehensive bicycle master plan, we've prioritized a list of roadways that we have considered to be possible for bicycle lanes and shared lane markings. Those roadways were evaluated based on the roadway widths, the on-street parking facilities, the speed limits, and the traffic volumes. What we've indicated is of the top 15 projects from the master plan, about 50% of those have been done. What we've been doing lately as far as selecting those roadways is our primary use has been relying on our resurfacing projects. We have since determined that whenever a roadway is being considered for resurfacing, we actually have our bicycle and pedestrian specialists to review it to determine if it's currently in the master plan, and we will include those pavement markings in the current contract that we do for resurfacing. The other thing that we may do is if there are existing roads that have additional road width, and as we're remarking the roadways, then we will direct our transportation field personnel to go ahead and install those with our in-house staff. The third option, which is the one that we prefer not to do, would be to remove existing markings from existing roadways and then put in the bike lane markings. We've done that on one occasion. The markings don't look as well, so we prefer not to tear up the pavement in order to redo the markings unless it's absolutely necessary. But those are the three primary criteria that we've been using. Lately it's been working very well as far as coordinating that work with the resurfacing projects. So, but that just gives an idea of how we determine where we need to place those bike lane markings and shared markings.
Questions or comments?
I just want
Ms. Blank.
to thank Ms. McCullough for the flexibility that they show when you know, like on Broad Street, when the bicycle lanes and the parking lanes and everything had to be switched because of they were going to block or not allow parking at small businesses along there. So thanks for the responsiveness.
Thank you. Thank you.
Anything else? If not, thank you very much. And I know that there was some controversy and discussion a while back about the Greenway detour for Salem Creek, and we had been discussing some possible workarounds on that. Do we have an update?
We do. We've ordered the materials to be able to put the bollards along the bike lane in order to allow bikers to be able to use those lanes. So the materials have not arrived. They should be here within the next couple of weeks. So once we receive those, we've also received concurrence from NCDOT to go ahead and put those in as long as we agree to maintain them.
Okay. So that's, again, for folks who are particularly interested in that Salem Creek Trail detour, the section on Rams Drive that has been the controversial one, which there was initially a bike lane, and then there was a decision to ask cyclists to dismount and walk it up the sidewalk. We've made arrangements to put up the plastic poles, the bollards, separating the pavement area from the vehicle travel area, and then essentially at that point leave it to the cyclist's discretion. If they're an experienced rider, we're not going to say you can't ride down there, whereas folks with kids and families may be well advised to continue to walk that section. But then that would increase the utility of the detour area while we're waiting for that construction to be finished. Ms. Light.
And just a question. I'm not a biker. Was it solely a safety measure that we said no riding your bike up through there?
Yeah, it was a safety question. There was concern with the level of truck traffic along there,
Yeah. Okay.
particularly without some permanent, essentially fixed barrier between the travel lane and the biking area. The bollards of course, aren't invulnerable to the vehicle that swerves through them, but they're a clearer demarcation of the areas of occupation between where the trucks are going to be running and between where the bikes would be. So, thank you very much. Item 4, please.
Item G4, report on sinkhole on private property, 3490 and 3500 Cedar Post Road in the South Ward.
Mr. Huff.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, this is an information item regarding a private property drainage issue, a sinkhole located between 3490 and 3500 Cedar Post Road. In your packet, you have an overview of the properties in question, and page 21, I'm sorry, and the approximate location of the sinkhole. This was alerted to staff in May of 2011. Basically, the sinkhole had formed at that time was a very large sinkhole, and staff responded to that, basically giving the property owners at that time a 70/30 cost share estimate. Because it was entirely on private property, that was the limit of our service there. Basically, the cost share estimate at that time was $167,200, of which 2 were affected property owners. Basically, the cap of which is $35,000 per affected property owner. So the city's cap in that project was $70,000, and the private property owners were responsible for $97,200 of that cost. So it made for a very expensive fix. Having said that, the property owners chose not to move forward due to the cost. Since then, as you would expect, the sinkhole has grown larger, considerably larger, and the pipe has continued to deteriorate up into the properties and is threatening to undermine one of the structures, the 3,500 structure to be exact. The property owners at this time are requesting that the city pay for 100% of the repair cost, pipe, and the sinkhole. At this time, again, it's entirely on private property. Staff has communicated with the property owners and advised of the 70-30, and that if 100% were granted, then numerous other property owners would be requesting the same service. Mr. Kimbrough, the owner of the 3490 property, has joined us tonight, and basically, again, the request on the citizens is for the city to pay 100% of the repair cost.
Okay. Ms. Light, do you have any questions for Mr. Huff before we invite the gentleman to?
No, I've been keeping up with this one, so I'll wait.
All right, Mr. McIntosh.
I'm just curious, do we know what the cause of the problem was?
Yes, I guess I've got a crude drawing that I can throw up on Elmer. Apologize for the crude nature of this, but right here we have the right-of-way of Cedar Post, and then we have the right-of-way pipe system that goes to private property and extends to the back corners of the dwelling or the property boundaries. Basically, this pipe was constructed in what appears to be highly erodible soils. In conjunction, there was no in-treatment or head wall put against the pipe. So as the water spilled out of the culvert system or the pipe system, the soft erodible soil started to dig away. This line you see is kind of the head cut that goes back up. As the pipe's joints fall off, it continues to head cut back up toward the structures. So that's kind of how this precipitated.
Was this in the city when it was constructed? When it was,
Yes, sir.
and so the inspection permitting process wouldn't speak to suitability of that?
Considering it was a private drainage structure, there would be no inspection process for that.
Okay.
Right-of-way structures, absolutely. Private system, no, sir.
Okay.
All right, Mr. Clark and then Mr. Taylor.
Can you refresh my memory on the 70-30? There must be a cap on it. That's
Yeah,
impacting
yes,
this
sir.
number.
35,000 or 70%, whichever's less, per affected property owner.
So we would spend 35 each. That's the cap,
That's
and
the
they pick
cap.
up the difference. Secondly, since 2011, have we done a re-estimate to know?
No, sir, we have
changed
not
significantly?
gone out, but we would estimate that the cost at this point would exceed 200,000.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Taylor.
Well, I think my question has been answered. It appeared, based on the drawing, the rendering that you had up on the screen, that the pipe started right at the right-of-way. I was curious to know, was this a private developer that installed this pipe, or was it this the city that came and installed this pipe?
Yes, sir. Typically speaking, with subdivision development of this type, the developer is going to install the infrastructure within the right-of-way and the private system, and then request that the city take over maintenance of the public right-of-way system. So you have a developer coming in, installing the entire system, then requesting the city take over maintenance of the right-of-way portions.
So we've maintained that particular right-of-way
We
since when?
maintain the right-of-way within Cedar Post, yes, sir.
The road, you mean?
The
basically.
road, yes.
You might want to show that back on
Yeah.
the screen, if it's
Yeah,
okay,
as
Mr.
far
Chairman.
as-
Curb gutter.
Councilmember Taylor, I don't know if you can see this green line that borders the road network, but that is the approximate boundary of the right-of-way. Anything inside that green line would be city-owned, operated, and maintained. Once it leaves that right-of-way boundary, then it's considered a private drainage system and the responsibility of the property owner directly. Then overlaid, you see these two nick points right here. That's where I've tried to illustrate the approximate right-of-way boundaries. this is not to scale, but to say, within those boundaries, that's the city-maintained portion.
Follow-up question to Mr. Saylor's query. When the city accepts dedication of the public street and the accompanying right-of-way, do we do an inspection of the drainage within that zone?
Within the public right-of-way, yes, sir. Those infrastructure components would be constructed to city standards, and they would be constructed to city specifications.
All right, and so the city would make the determination that, in fact, they met those standards before accepting the public dedication. Mr. Taylor, I'm sorry, did I interrupt you?
No, I think that was a good question, Mr. Chairman. Just one last question. I know the city tries to stick to the 70-30 program as much as possible. I know we want to be good stewards of the taxpayer dollars. Have we ever seen a situation like this, and we acted as a committee outside of the 70-30 program? And if so, what was the catalyst for us doing that?
70-30 program is set by ordinance, so no, the committee has never overruled it because city council set the ordinance. It would require a change in the ordinance to have any change in the policy. The council, based upon committee recommendation, has modified the 70-30 program over the years to make it more generous to the public. But it used to be a 60-40 program with a lower cap and less things qualified, and council did change that several years ago to make it what we have today.
Okay.
Ms. Light.
Have any homeowners who have been faced with expensive 70-30 projects ever tried to collect from insurance companies? Do you know?
We've had conversations with various other property owners with these similar types of drainage issues. For the most part, it's our understanding that the homeowner's insurance will not cover these types of issues.
So the insurance company would be willing to let the house fall into the canyon there and then have to pay for the house?
Speaking historically, I don't know of any insurance companies that have came to the table to pay the property owner's portion of the cost share. The 3,500 property, I guess, to note that's in a state of foreclosure as well. That's the property that's most imminently in danger of the sinkhole as it expands.
And certainly from the angle, it seems that it will continue to be the most threatened, but the sinkhole is moving towards the road, so pretty soon 3490 is going, and hey folks, that's about 8 or 10 feet there between the side of the sinkhole and the house. So as I say, I totally understand that we can't open a whole new can of worms by paying 100% of something that's on private property. But I simply do not understand the whole, insurance having no part in this game. So.
Mr. Taylor, then Mr. McIntosh.
Yeah. Members of the committee and those who are at the table, I believe this is starting to be a matter of public safety. We definitely want to make sure we don't open the can of worms and everybody doesn't come to the table and ask us to step outside of the 70-30 program. I understand why policies are in place, and that's the reason why they're in place. But this one seems like it could possibly get out of control, and I'm somewhat concerned about it. On one hand, we have a property owner who cannot collect insurance, who cannot protect himself, and I'm sure there are others here in the event that the house falls over into the crevice. And then on one hand, we have to be good stewards of the taxpayers' dollars. So I'm somewhat perplexed here. I think if we don't act, we could have a major problem. But if we do act, we could open up a can of worms that we can't get the crocodile back in the cage, so to speak. So I'm open to suggestions. Is this a situation where we must change the policy or else, Mr. Chairman?
My interpretation is that, as I understand the policy, staff is applying it correctly, and we would have to in order to go to 100% of the cost in this case, we would have to simply violate the policy. I think we would be legally infirm in doing that. We would have to first change the policy and make all such properties eligible. And I can tell you off the cuff, I know of two property owners in my area who have been distressed for some time, who would fall in similar categories and would immediately step forward. I would call them up and say, you know, the policy has been changed, and I think we would see a cascade of such projects if we did. Mr. McIntosh.
I'm just curious why there isn't something during the inspection process that catches this sort of a problem before it happens. To what extent we have to look at these things while they're being done? No? Is there not? Stormwater doesn't get involved in that. Building inspections doesn't look at plans to.
For
we sign
drainage
off.
systems and structures that the city would own, operate, or maintain, yes, sir, we would. For private property systems, however, no, sir.
But we do that for 2x4s and sheetrock and plumbing and electrical in a house, yet we don't do it on something that's potentially a much bigger catastrophe and affects many more property owners. It's surprising to me.
Mr. Clark, then Ms. Light.
I'm just going to echo what you said, Mr. Bessie. I can think of 3 or 4 in the West Ward, and if I and that I know of right off the top of my head, I think he should be looking at $20 or $30 million right off the bat. This is a huge issue. I got one that's off with Tipperary.
Yes.
That would be at least $1 million to $2 million on a project. I know of another gentleman, the one on Plymouth, that one came out not that bad. The other one we fixed on Arbor, which they fixed. We didn't participate, but that was probably $100,000.
I remember that house.
Yeah, that house took the house.
And it was, the house was leaning over into the hole. It was, it
But I mean,
looked like that.
we live on a hilly community, and this gets back to why I have pushed strongly for tighter stormwater ordinances, so we capture the water so it doesn't get to the creeks as much. You don't have as much energy as you describe it. But it's a huge issue.
Yeah. Ms. Light.
Well, and certainly, this is simply a hill that comes down from Peters Creek Parkway and disappears into the woods. And obviously, the developer did not put in adequate drainage between the two properties. I have no answer to this. I certainly feel very sorry for the Kimbroughs, and about, I don't know that anyone lives in 3500. I know it's been foreclosed upon, so it looks like it with the cars, but so really no one is going to fall into the hole from that house, but you know, I just don't know.
Mr. Taylor and, okay, Mr. Taylor.
No, I don't have anything else.
Mr. Turner, I know in the event of, and I know I'm reaching a little bit, but just humor me for a second. In the event of a state disaster, I know that state governments can kind of levy federal governments for disaster relief funds in the event that something happened or something was about to happen. Do we have the authority to tap into state dollars for situations like these? And I know I'd hate to throw up my hands and say there's nothing we can do. So I'm reaching a little bit because I want to find out what options we actually have. And I think it'd be a crying shame to turn a blind eye to Mr. Kimbrough's situation. And I've got a couple in the Southeast Ward that are very similar to this, and it would open up a can of worms. But do we turn a blind eye and say there's nothing we can do, the policy is the policy, or do we try to leverage our relationships on the federal and the state level in order to get some type of relief for the people who we represent?
It would take a gubernatorial declaration of a disaster in order for state funds to be made available, just like it takes a presidential declaration for certain other funds, federal funds, to be made available. So I don't think that option is available to the city. In answer to where I think you're going with the question of is it a hazard or a safety issue that has to be addressed, the council does have the safe housing code, which was used in the Arbor Road situation, to force the improvements to be made if the problem exacerbates to the point where council considers it to be a public health nuisance that needs to be abated.
But again, the property owners had to pay the cost, right?
That is correct.
Ms. Light?
Well, in this case, the bank owns it. If we can just declare it a hazard, the bank would have to fix it. No?
It's a good question.
Well, both property owners will be involved, so yeah, it would pull in the
Well,
bank and Mr.
The bank's lawyers would,
oh,
I think the bank's lawyers would probably want to have a word on that.
Yeah.
I wouldn't assume just because the mortgage has been foreclosed on, the bank owns it.
Yeah, it could be somewhere in between.
The bank
I
may
thought-
not take it.
And the foreclosure is still pending, as I understand it. So I
Oh,
don't
really?
have to transfer it.
There have been instances where banks just said, we'll forgive the mortgage because the liability was greater than the value of the property.
Interesting. So, okay, now, did Mr. Kimbrough ask for an opportunity to comment?
He got here after the meeting started, so we didn't.
Mr. Kimbrough, I take it you are standing, sir, and you...
Mr. Gray.
I am not Mr. Kimbrough. My name is Mike Grace. I'm an attorney.
Oh, Mr. Grace, of course. I need new glasses.
Would ask for a brief opportunity.
Please come forward and for the record, if you'll again give your name and address and your relationship to Mr. Kimbrough and give us your comments on behalf of the Kimbroughs, please.
Thank you, sir. My name again is Mike Grace. I'm an attorney here in town. My address is 200 West 1st Street. I represent Mr. Bobby and Viola Kimbrough, who are the owners of the property located at 3490. And this is my disclaimer first and foremost. I got into this matter a few hours ago when Mr. Kimbrough's son contacted me, and I've only had the opportunity to do limited research, so I will follow that adage that my father told me many years ago: if you don't say so much, you don't have so much to take back. So I will limit my comments, but I will raise some questions that I hope you will take and have staff look into. First and foremost, I take umbrage with the term sinkhole. The research I have done indicates to me that a sinkhole is usually a naturally occurring event, one caused by underwater streams and aquifers and waters moving around beneath the surface that none of us control. This is not the case with this particular phenomenon. This is a washout caused by stormwater runoff and drainage. If you'll look at the map you have, directly due north of this property is a new Walmart property, matter of a few hundred feet. I have not had an opportunity to investigate, and the Kimbroughs will have to expend some money to investigate whether or not any of the stormwater from that Walmart was tapped into the existing system that development has had for some 30 years, and which is totally inadequate to handle any water running off from Walmart. It may very well be that the developer who developed that property put in the proper and the necessary stormwater drainage to handle the water for that development as it existed at that time. I haven't looked at the topos, and I certainly haven't looked at what the new drainage systems are, but there's a lot of water coming off that Walmart. And if that water is the cause, and I have a picture here, and I haven't seen it shown. If I could pass it around, you can clearly see the broken pipe that's causing the gully wash there. It's not a sinkhole. It is a gully wash from a tremendous amount of water. And the question is whether that's the water that was intended to be handled by that system, or whether it's new and additional water coming from another source. If that's the case, then the stormwater runoff maps and plans that were put in place when Walmart was developed, if it in fact does dump into this development drainage system, someone should have determined whether the existing facilities were sufficient to handle that runoff. I don't have the answers to those questions, and that's something we'll have to probably hire engineers to look into, and I hope the city engineers will look into it. But the law as to naturally occurring sinkholes is a lot different than stormwater runoff. You don't have any ordinances covering sinkholes. We have ordinances coming out of the wazoo covering stormwater runoff, and if this is a stormwater runoff problem, then I think it is something outside the ambit of your 3070 ordinance. And we ought to get back to the problem of where is this water coming from?
Well, do you want to pause a moment while we explore that question?
That would be my statement. I have posed the questions to you. I will take my leave and sit back unless you have questions. I'm happy to try to answer questions.
If you'll pause, Mr. Grace. Mr. Clark?
And I realize you've just taken this on. I'd be curious, and again, you don't need to give me an answer today, you can relate later, what the relationship has been with the insurance company. I do know enough about insurance to know whenever I have filed, there's always some little, on page 16 is a disclaimer that if it happens on Tuesday after 5 o'clock, when mine happened, it's not covered. So I understand the realities of that, but I'd just be curious if you've had any contact with your insurance.
I can't answer that. They have had contact, and the insurance company has indicated that there is no coverage for this event.
Would it cover if it got close enough and damaged the house?
No.
So they consider this I know termites that don't cover it because they consider that more of a wasting away as opposed to a sudden catastrophic event.
And for your collective information, my firm just bought the building right here at 200 West First Street, Dick Badgett Callaway building.
Okay.
We had to purchase sinkhole and stormwater damage insurance.
Okay.
Because there has been an event on First Street, just 50 yards from our building. So we purchased that. Unless you have a rider in your insurance policy that covers that particular thing.
Okay, thank you.
It doesn't cover it.
But you've raised a good question about does our code or does the law distinguish between a natural stream sinkhole and a stormwater runoff related? My understanding is, and I'm going to have to ask staff to correct me if I'm mistaken, my understanding is eligibility for the 70-30 program is in part predicated on the conclusion that the situation has been caused or exacerbated by runoff coming from the public street.
There is a requirement that the system that is causing the damage is carrying public water.
So
there is no requirement that the problem be a sinkhole. It is purely a severe erosion situation that would cause a qualification under this situation. But yes, you do have to carry public system water as part of the requirement.
Right, I was getting nods, affirming nods from our staff attorney as well on that. So I think the takeaway from that, from our perspective, is that that's a given. We understand that it's the problem is that there is public right-of-way water that's coming through the pipe and making the mischief, and that is part of what triggers the project's eligibility for the city to pay 70% of the cost of addressing it. So, did I interrupt, Mr. Grace, when you had something else?
I have completed my comments at this point. As I indicated, I'm going to do my research. I'm sure staff will. I'm going to try to determine if we have a tremendous increase in the stormwater runoff, an increase that this system wasn't designed for and can handle and wasn't picked up by whatever staff was in place when Walmart submitted its plans and had its plans approved.
And if you identify any other public agency with funding that can be applied to this kind of situation, please do let us know.
I certainly will.
All right, thank you very much. Ms. Light.
Some more information that would be useful. This neighborhood was built about 30 years ago. When was Peters Creek Parkway actually built?
I'll have to go back. I don't remember.
That would be worthwhile. And what about? I'm guessing that Walmart would have to have had a stormwater study and do they have a containment pond and everything?
They have management on site.
They have management, so that makes that problematic, perhaps. But it's worth looking at.
We'll also bring back information on where their runoff discharge is from their treatment system.
Yeah.
We
Okay.
can communicate that. Well, we would certainly appreciate that.
Yeah.
Mr. Taylor?
So, Mr. Chairman, I imagine we might be holding this item in committee until the information comes back.
We'll anticipate further reports. Thank you, Mr. Grace.
Thank you all.
Appreciate that. And if,
Mr. Grace.
pardon my myopia, please.
No, not at all. Thank you all.
Mr. Huff, thank you very much. Item 5, please.
Item G5, presentation on Jamison Park and Quarry Master Plan.
And I believe Mr. Grant and Mr. Royston will be presenting. Gentlemen, can we take the quarry first? Sure. Mr. Taylor has to hit out and would be particularly interested in seeing that.
We just went over these.
That
was Winston-Salem Lake.
Winston Lake and Salem Lake. Thank you.
Get the right lake.
I want a lake in my ward. I want a lake in my ward.
Good luck.
Ask Mr. Kimbrough, perhaps.
I don't want that one. I don't want that bad.
Thank you. Mr. Royston.
Good afternoon, Councilman Bessie, members of the committee. First project I would like to go over is the Phase 1 implementation for the quarry master plan. The picture that I'm showing you here is an overall plan view of the quarry. The most significant improvements that staff believes can be implemented as part of Phase 1 will be more focused here in this particular area, which we've called the quarry village or the village lawn. One of the first things that we will have to do, and I want to show you another drawing, and I'll come back to this one in a minute, is that we've identified significant areas that are going to require site cleanup. This kind of gives you an idea from an aerial view in terms of the kind of the orange or yellowish areas. Those are areas that we feel need to be cleaned up, that are infested with kudzu. There's a lot of the areas that, over the years, the kudzu has begun to spread, so we need to define a perimeter and contain that kudzu, and then remove it from the site. The areas that you see in the more purple areas are where the city stores the leaf mulch. A lot of, vegetation management and some streets and utilities use that area for soil, storing of soil. And a lot of our storm trees, when they fall, vegetation management uses those, that area for, people can come in and cut wood. So the total acreage for this entire area is about 42 acres that we feel need to be cleaned up before we can even move forward with any type of development. The area that I mentioned before in terms of the quarry village, you can kind of get a better view of that here.
Mr. Royce, could you pause for a moment and go back to the earlier?
We'll find here just a relevant question about the kudzu.
Yes.
Did you mention how you would go about cleaning it up? I know we've had concerns about how that actually happens. Are we talking about goats? Are we talking about some innovative way to do it? Have you figured out how to clean up the kudzu?
We've actually used, it's going to require several different methods to eradicate the kudzu. Some of our steeper slopes, we've talked about using goats. We've actually, we contracted through our master planning process, contracted with a student that's currently at the University of Georgia, where we injected helium into the ground. We helped devise a coupling that you can put on a drill where you actually inject helium into the ground. And for some reason, with helium being an inert gas, the kudzu can't stand it. But if you get close enough to a root ball, it can actually eradicate the entire plant. It would require some substantial planning in terms of doing that, but we did find that it was effective. We've actually used it on the site. There's a pretty good area now that's kind of cleared out where we use helium, but it will require various methods. There's some heavy equipment that uses like a comb that you can use to kind of pull it out.
Mm-hmm.
There's some equipment that you can use. It's almost like a sonar. It kind of detects where the large root ball is, and we can go in and dig those out. But with thousands of plants, of different types of kudzu plants on the site, it's going to require some time.
Thank you, sir.
Go ahead, please.
As part of Phase 1, we feel that in this particular area here, we think that we can dedicate some monies to build a quarry overlook, something that where people kind of get out and be able to look out over the water's edge and feel safe about doing so, maybe with some decking. Doing a lookout mound, which is here, which is an area that you kind of walk up to kind of get some elevation. You can kind of look out over the site. Developing an amphitheater here. Developing about 10 picnic shelters, 6 larger corporate picnic shelters, somewhere around 40 by 80 in terms of size, and about 10 smaller family picnic shelters. About 3 restrooms that we can put into the site, we can develop on the site, and take this entire area and create what we feel will be like the quarry lawn area. It'd be an area we could host where people could come out and have a series of, a multitude of outdoor events. There'll be some entrance upgrades from the 3 entrances on the site from Reynolds Park, Light Street, and Butler. There'll be security improvements, some infrastructure improvements with utilities, and we think that once we do that, you'll kind of develop this type of feel, and this is something that we feel confident that we could do or implement as part of Phase 1, where it's this large lawn area, a lookout in this particular area, as you can look out over the quarry lake, the lookout mound, amphitheater, you can see the city skyline in the background. We think that will make a substantial impact, and actually that will actually become the heart of the site that we feel could also foster future development. One of the final things we wanted to make sure that we addressed as part of Phase 1 was developing some sort of walkway connection to continue the greenway to Walltown Street, and also make sure that we provide access down to the quarry lake. And we, in working with our consultant, found that we had this idea in terms of a vision. This particular photo here is not of the quarry, but we wanted to develop some type of boardwalking system that was accessible, that had various lookout points, so you're almost traversing through the trees to get down to the quarry. We think that would be a very unique experience for Winston and for the residents, and we think it would be very, very nice. But doing that in an area like this, we think would be a very substantial showpiece for the quarry, and is also part of our Phase 1. The actual greenway extension, where our greenway currently ends to Walltown Street, is not part of the Phase 1 dollars that we kind of budgeted for this, but I believe that there are additional monies that will be used to kind of create that connection.
I believe, in fact, that in the proposed draft bond package, there's, what is it, $300,000 in dollars for the Walltown Greenway extension all the way over to Walltown?
Right.
Okay. And is that shown on the map there, the trail system that you showed?
The actual boardwalk piece would is actually in this area, which you'll see here on the map. It's kind of labeled as an unpaid foot trail. But going back and looking at it further, and you see how it winds back and forth just to make it accessible. We think by using some sort of board walking, we'll be able to make complete that, get the access down to the quarry lake itself without it becoming an invasive experience for the ecosystem that's developed there.
And south of the quarry lake, there is another similarly winding trail that connects up to a path running along it. I believe that's Light Street, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Here?
Along, yes. Light Street over ultimately to the Walltown Street connector. Is that the route of, do you know off the top of your head, is that the anticipated route of the Greenway connector
Yes.
completion?
Yes, we'll still need to go in and do some further studies to make sure that it remains accessible, but that is the proposed route.
Okay. I note one of the things that we gain by having that as a separate item in the bond package as opposed to trying to do it through STPDA is a lot more flexibility, I think, in our design criteria. As long as we maintain ADA accessibility, we don't have to do it to the same width, and et cetera.
There's one portion that you may see on your map that may we need to kind of update and adjust, is that there's an area on the map that's pointed out to be a hotel conference center. It's actually, through the master plan process, will not be a hotel/conference center, but we envision it being in some sort of building where we're currently finding old steam shovels and a lot of equipment that was used on the site when it was a functioning quarry. We want to kind of create a building, like a museum showplace where we can show off that equipment and kind of talk about the history of the site.
Is that phase one or a later phase?
That would be in a later phase.
Later
But
phase.
that would be in a later phase, but the lookout will be an extension of that building, so we'll be able to add on to that at a future date.
Okay. Questions? Mr. Taylor?
Mr. Royce, if you would put that map back up, please. If you would scroll just down south, okay, right there. A little bit further, please, sir. You see the intersection of Walltown and Marble Street. I know that the city has already purchased a facility there to possibly do a district police office right on Walltown Street. And I think it abuts to the bottom of the property. At some point in time in the later phase of the quarry project, could we maybe investigate the possibility of having an entrance come from the back side of the quarry project as well? Is that something that's on our radar?
You mean in terms of pedestrian access, or actually this walkway that you see here is a pedestrian access into the site.
Okay, from Pleasant?
Yes, right here off of Pleasant Street. And we haven't really, that portion of the property we kind of received as in a later phase, but we do envision now also being some type of pedestrian access for the neighborhoods on that side as well.
Okay, great. And one of my last questions, I'm sure I know the answer to, but I always talk about helping the Southeast Ward and the city to be a better place to live, work, and relax. And when I think about this quarry plan, I think definitely relaxation comes to mind. But I know there's a number of freshwater jellyfish and maybe some other species inside of the lake, inside of the quarry. Will the citizens have access to laking and boating? I know this is a different animal than Salem Lake, but the question has come up. I'm sure I know the answer to it. If you can address that, please.
We feel that over time, the ecosystems that have developed there have developed naturally. And we don't want to disturb that. We want to kind of have people come out and experience that beauty, but to kind of leave it as undisturbed as possible. We haven't envisioned any type of motorized boats. We have discussed some maybe glass bottom boat tours, maybe with trolling motors, where we maybe take people out on the water. That we haven't looked at doing that as part of phase one, but in the long-term vision, maybe in the second phase, we did look at that. Tim and I took a group out from City of Winston-Salem University, I think last year. Took another group out this year, and the water has risen probably 7 or 8 feet in that time. So there's some things going on the site that we still have to kind of go out and learn. And to kind of, the master plan covers the top of the site. We need to figure out what's going on underground so that we'll be able to accurately tell that story. So before we get people down to that level, we want to make sure that it's as safe as possible.
Thank you.
Mr. Clark?
A general comment on both these. We're going to have the bond meetings in the West Ward actually at Metal Arts School, which is next to this one. And I think it applies to both and maybe some other things. We need to be sure when we meet with the citizens that they know what they're getting and not getting for the bond referendum. I don't think you're getting everything on these pieces of paper. So we need to be prepared at the appropriate meetings to say, okay, the bond referendum is covering this versus that. Because I'm just guessing you're getting a small percent of this through the bonds.
Phase one.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, with the quarry, there are some things that will be phased. With Jameson, we plan on implementing the entire plan.
Okay, well, then be ready for that question. Okay. Second question gets to kind of a question earlier. Most man-made lakes, you've got a stream and you dam up one end and it fills up a valley or whatever. And the water comes in from the stream that was always there and it goes out over a dam. This is actually a hole in the ground that was dug to take granite out. Does it have a natural feeding and a natural exit of water, or is this a stagnant pool that will, like the Great Salt Lake, that rises or falls with rainwater? And if so, and you've answered part of it, is there a tremendous amount of difference in the amount of water in it? And I'm concerned about it being stagnant, I guess, because if it does not have any water flowing through it, I would think it would be more of a stagnant pool than
It's constantly been fed by an underground stream. It will rise and fall based on evaporation. There's actually a technical term that geologists use to describe that process. But there is some evaporation that occurs during the summer months. It is being fed, but the way that Vulcan kind of designed it was so that there are areas where it can overflow into smaller ponds. Okay. The one thing that we've noticed is that we can't ever find a spot on any of the rock where the water used to be. And so it's constantly rising. And even since the time where I first visited the site about 7 years ago, it's up about 15 feet. So we know that we may have to start pumping some of the water out. And, you know, we've looked at some kind of brainstormed about some possible ideas of how to keep the water level somewhat kind of steady, because it's really going to be difficult to develop the site if you have a constantly changing water level.
Yeah.
It is being fed with a tremendous amount of rainwater, snow and ice. It's going to rise and drop based on the water table. We've had some really wet years here recently, so it's much higher than it's ever been.
Conversely, we had some very dry years if we go quick.
Yes.
Is there a stream nearby that would make sense to exit the water to?
There is a stream. There's a stream, and there are some series of smaller ponds that are on the site. There are some here and here, and you can see this stream here that a lot of the water kind of gets out and overflows.
So it can get out once you pump it. There's a place to pump it to.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, are there other questions? Further presentation on quarry?
No, sir.
I just want to say I think this is a good plan. The citizens will have a choice whether or not we want to vote on this with the bond referendum. I know there's a good deal of money going into it. I think ultimately we'll see a good bang for our buck. And as Mr. Clark mentioned, we do have a meeting, I believe, on May the 1st. Mr. City Manager, I believe it's May the 5th.
May the 1st
At Roscoe Anderson Rec Center in the gym to
Right.
discuss this further. So thank you, Mr. Royston, for that presentation. I think this is a wonderful thing.
No, thank you.
Thank you, and I believe now it's Jameson's time.
This is the master plan that will be completed for Jameson Park. One of the more talked about improvements for the site was access to the greenway. Currently, there are some issues with parking, with the parking lot access from Metal Arc. If you can look closely, this faint line here kind of shows you where our current access road is down to the current parking lot. There's a small portion of that that is kind of veers off of our property just a bit. One of the things that we wanted to make sure we accomplished with this site was change the actual entrance for the park and access to Muddy Creek and make that a much safer experience for our users. We had some discussions with the school system and worked out an agreement with them to possibly use their bus entrance as the main access into the park. Using and developing this area for parking. As you come into the site, we have parking here. This is a remote maintenance facility that we feel we'll have to staff to maintain the park. This is additional parking. Inside the parking lot, we've built in rain gardens to help filter the water from the parking lot before it gets down into Muddy Creek. One of the overall goals for the plan, one of the overall visions for this particular park was to make an educational experience. And create some outdoor educational opportunities for the middle school and the elementary school to use as part of their curriculum. We have this particular area of the site is going to be the accessible greenway access from the parking lot down to Muddy Creek Greenway. And as part of that overall experience in this area, there will be a variety of outdoor children gardens, 2 different types of potential play activities for children, where you have traditional playground equipment and also kind of a discover, explore, discover, find type of activity for the kids, and also an outdoor garden for children to use. We have a large covered shelter here. Amphitheater, picnic shelters, 2 separate I don't call them dog parks, but dog runs that are going to be incorporated as part of the overall plan. We have a half-mile walking loop that's going to pretty much circumference a large open play field. We didn't want to designate any particular type of play area for the park or designate that area as a soccer field or any type of particular ball field, but it is wide enough to accommodate various types of outdoor activities. We have.
Is it going to be flat so you could play a sport?
You would be able to play a sport, yes. There are various. We incorporated some bocce courts. We have conversations with several groups, but bocce and or petanque and horseshoe pits are something that came out of the public input sessions. We wanted to make sure those were incorporated as part of the design. Several, not your typical outdoor restrooms, but we call them comfort stations, something that might be a little different than your traditional restroom, maybe composting toilets. But we wanted to make sure that whatever experiences we provided on the site were something that were environmentally sensitive and something that we could potentially teach the users and the residents to and the residents to use and learn and appreciate. Overall, we have a large play field, shade structures, open lawn areas for people who want to go out and just sit out in the grass and just enjoy just a nice outdoor afternoon into the park. You have some great views from the top of the site down into the lower. You'll notice a lot of the development hardscape is going to occur on the upper northern part of the site. Because of the flood zone, there are a lot of things we could not do on the southern end. We incorporated that more active area at the northern end of the site, more the passive areas on the lower end. As part this particular plan, we did not anticipate any type of phasing based on the cost estimate. We feel that we'll be able to implement this entire plan as it's seen here. Any questions?
Questions?
Do we have any, on both these parks, do we have any sort of estimates of operating costs, annual operating costs?
We've investigated some of that. We haven't gone. It takes us about 30 minutes to get from our current maintenance facility to this site. We anticipate that we'll have to have staff that will actually report here to this site that will provide a level of service at this park that will be needed to maintain it at the level in which it's developed. Operationally, I don't want to put my foot in my mouth. I'm going to let Tim speak on that.
We've been having conversation with budget, and I believe the numbers that came back for Corey were somewhere around $141,000 a year operating costs. I think Jameson Park right around $29,000. I believe is what it was, Ben.
That information we provided in the presentation at the last special meeting. I can't remember the number comprehensive that information is in.
Mr. Grant, do you recall for Quarry, is that phase one annual operating, or would that be a later phase?
Phase one.
Phase one annual operating, 140.
I think it was 141,000.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Clark?
Not to challenge your numbers, but I can imagine you could maintain this park with any sense of standards for $29,000 a year.
I'd have to go back.
Okay, I mean, I just...
Well, and my question...
well, if I may finish. I walked the park at Whitaker School. Now, we have a park right beside it. The bathrooms have been closed for years. The soccer goals had no nets. The grass is hardly cut in the summer and all season of soccer. Matter of fact, there's very little grass left. Something as simple as that. I like the parks, but I think we need to be very, very realistic on what it's going to take to maintain them at a level that we would be proud of. And I see a full-time person here, and you may not, but the equivalent of a full-time person, that's a lot more than $29,000. My thoughts. Thank you.
And that was my comment. I mean, the big park in my ward needs a lot of love. So I know it has been under-maintained for years. Just wondering if we're going down that same route with building more.
Well, we'd have to pay for it. We'd have to pay for it.
Right.
And should anticipate. Anything else, Mr. Royston?
No, sir.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you very much, gentlemen. Appreciate it. Mr. Grant, Mr. Royston. I believe that is everything on our agenda today. Is there anything that we need to add? Hearing nothing, we will stand adjourned. Thank you very much.